Hi everyone, this is Andy, and I'm probably taking a little bit of a risk in trying to communicate my reflections over video, but we'll see how it goes. Um, I've also written stuff down, but out of a spirit of authenticity, I'm going to try and speak off the cuff on a lot of the topic matter because I think it'll be helpful in articulating some of the things that I might not have already articulated. So, and it's more challenging than just writing it out for me, and I wanted to challenge myself. But on the readings and the videos, I enjoyed them overall. I want to start with the videos, although my favorite part of the whole set of assignments this week was the Farhadian reading because he dives into a lot of things that I find interesting. The videos, specifically the worship resource video, was dated, which was a good thing for me because it made me nostalgic for the days of my attending my Southern Baptist church in early 2000s, late 1990s. During the time when the Baptist church was, or at least this church was transitioning from old school Baptist hymnal worship to new school contemporary worship. It's interesting because after everything I've read, I still call it worship when I'm talking about music and singing. Anyway, so it was good to see this video and kind of jog my memory and think about how I actually felt back then when I was attending the service. And I think back and I see that it was so performance-based. You would get the people come up, play their music, then everyone would sit down and listen to the sermon. And you'd basically be done apart from a sometimes emotional altar call where hopefully as many people as possible would come down and accept Jesus. And that's a good thing, apart from all the things that go alongside it, like emotional, spurring of the moment thing that draws people out and pulls them down there, but doesn't necessarily affect anything because the practices that are influenced simply by going and singing a couple songs and then listening to a sermon are not deeply rooted. And so a lot of the time, people's lives don't change. And I could talk forever on this, but I don't have time on the video. I already have rambled too much. So Farhadian, let's go to the Farhadian reading. It was really good. I want to simply talk about one part, and that's when he references a guy by the name of Clifford Geertz. He references his assessment that, quote, religious symbols induce in the worshiper a certain distinctive set of dispositions which lend a chronic character to the flow of his activity and the quality of his experience. And I then reword Farhadian's assessment of Geertz. Geertz makes symbols as deep metaphors for the religious person. And interestingly enough, Farhadian acknowledges the beauty behind such a liturgical symbolism and then rejects it. He rejects the assertion of an inductive liturgical symbolism if it's not founded in God's revelatory act in the Holy Spirit. I guess to put it more simply, unless God uses these symbols as a means through which he reveals himself to the worshiper, then they have no inherent value. That's my interpretation of Farhadian's rejection of Geertz. And it's Barthian, which I'm a big Barth fan. And I could go on, but I do find issue with, I guess, idolizing the structures of the liturgy themselves. I do find extreme value in them, but it goes back to what Farhadian says. There's a universal aspect and there's a particular aspect, and I think the subjective act of worship is met by the universal revelation of God through certain things, but not every time, because the subjective and the universal have to meet, and they don't always do that. Whether it's where someone is when they come to worship, or any number of things. I don't know. I just know that God has the autonomy to disclose himself to a believer if and when he so chooses. I think I got a little bit heady there, and I probably rambled some more. So, all that to say, I enjoyed the readings and the videos, and all of them made very clear, bar the Farhadian reading, which didn't really talk about this. Worship isn't just about singing; it's about the whole service. And although things are changing, worship has pretty much been one-sided, at least for the last however many decades, because that's just the way we think. That's the way we participate in everything. We're consumers. It's a consumeristic perspective on church, and it has to change. And I think it is changing for the better. I'm not sure of all the factors that are contributing to that change, but liturgy, high church, and sacramental theology, and participativeness within all pieces of different churches, whether they're charismatic or whatever it may be. I think the influence or emphasis on participation is growing. So now I want to talk about context, which is, I think, the third piece of what you suggested we discuss. That one's an interesting one, and I always tend to get overly philosophical on this, because when I lived in Thailand, people tried to contextualize the gospel so much that they reached compromise. And I think you got a watered-down gospel that met a group of people, specifically in Thailand, that didn't have the epistemological framework to understand that watered-down gospel. It was very difficult to watch, and I didn't know how to speak to it, how to respond to it, because I didn't have the education, and I didn't really know. I hadn't experienced it before. So what of my context? What does that bear on my desire for worship? I really don't know how to answer that question. I grew up in Arkansas. I lived in Asia for multiple years, and then I've lived on the West Coast since 2013. All of these different geographies boast different contexts, or at least subjective perspectives on the world, different worldviews. So I'm not sure what my context even is. I'm white, I'm young, I'm evangelical, I'm in Seattle, so maybe someone would call me a millennial hipster who works at Amazon and attends a PCA church. I don't know what all that bears on my context, so I can't necessarily speak to it very well. But that's difficult. But in talk of context, I want to go back to Farhadian, because he talks about the need for contextualization, and one striking thing that he used was the Papua New Guinea pig worship, or not pig worship, the way they understand pigs and their old religion, and using that, and when you're trying to demonstrate the gospel to them, to compare to Jesus, or to demonstrate what Jesus did on the cross. And I do like that idea. What I want to point out is that it's not a change, if we're talking about communion or something like that. It's not a change in the way they worship. Contextualization is an intellectual means of gospel demonstration or distribution. It's not something that changes the practice. So when we talk about orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy, which I looked up orthopathy, and it's a medical field or something like that. When we talk about those three things, orthodoxy is right belief, orthopraxy is right practice, and orthopathy is right feeling or religious affections. Right belief doesn't change. What changes is how you communicate it. And so when I look at orthopraxy, or right practice, I don't see the practices change as much as how you communicate what the practice is doing. But that's just, maybe I need to grow in that, maybe I need to understand it more deeply, but that's my perspective right now, because I look at communion, I look at baptism, I look at the disciplines, fasting and prayer and all these different things. None of those practices are changing. So maybe non-biblically articulated or non-church articulated practices might change, but the typical practices you think of in the service, confession, all these, I don't see them changing. I just see the way you communicate them is changing. And maybe I misinterpreted Farhadian there. That's my perspective. Those are my reflections. Oh my gosh, I just spoke for 9 minutes. Please forgive me. Anyway, so here's my question. I'm going to post my notes and my question in the thing, because I don't think everyone's going to, in the forum, because I don't think everyone's going to be able to finish this. How does orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy relate to each other? And does one spur on the other, or are they all intertwined? I think that would spur on some really good dialogue, because I think we're going to have different opinions on that. So 10 minutes flat. I'm done. Nice to talk with you, everyone.